All right, let's talk about multiplying and dividing integers. The first thing you're going to notice here is that we have the definition of integers, and that is whole numbers and their opposites. And this is a definition that we've seen before. It's important to remember that whole numbers are numbers here like 2 and 1, and then their opposites are the ones that have negative signs in front. Now, before we go through and start filling in this page, I'm going to jump one page ahead, and I'm going to remind us of something that we've seen in a previous lesson, and that is double negative. Now, we saw this in the lesson that talked about adding and subtracting integers, and I was talking about problems like 3 minus negative 2. And when we saw those two negatives right next to each other, we turned it into a giant plus sign. And the example that I gave in English was don't not wash your hands. If I say to you, don't not wash your hands, what I'm actually asking you to do is to wash your hands. So in English and in math, a double negative, putting two negatives together, in this case, don't is a negative and not is a negative, it's turning into a positive command, wash your hands. And in the example over here where I had two negatives, they became a positive. We're going to use this to help us fill in this. 1 times 2. Well, that's a problem we have been able to do probably since maybe 2nd or 3rd grade. Here's another one. Negative 1 times 2. Well, how many negatives do you see here? I only see 1. So this is going to end up being a negative 2. But now I have a problem where I see two negatives, a double negative, which tells me that this is actually going to turn into a positive 2. On this next problem, I'm not sure what's going to happen, so I'm going to leave it blank, but I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do this. Right here, I see two negatives, and I know that a double negative is going to give me a positive. This must be positive 2. And in this same problem, I see two more negatives, which I know a double negative is going to give me a positive. Negative 1 times negative 1 must be positive 1. And 2 times 1 is 2. And I bet there's some sort of a pattern here. 2, negative 2. 2, and then another 2. I bet this will be a negative 2. I've left some spaces over here for me to fill in how many negatives that I see. Well, there were no negatives in this problem. There was 1 negative here. 1, 2. See, there were 2 negatives in this problem. 1, 2, 3 negatives in that problem, and 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives in this problem. Now I'm going to get my highlighter, and before I do, I want you to see, do you notice a pattern between how many negatives there are and whether or not the answer is positive or negative? Let's look at our positive answers. Here my answer was a positive 2. There were 2 negatives. Here my answer was a positive 2. There were 4 negatives. Here my answer was positive 2. There were 0 negatives. I bet that the next answer that would be a positive 2 would have how many negatives? 0, 2, 4. I bet it would take 6. Now what do you notice about all of these numbers that I have highlighted? 0, 2, 4, 6. These are all even numbers. So I bet if there are an even amount of negatives that my answer will end up being positive. Let's check to see if the opposite is true. I got a negative answer when there was 1. I got a negative answer when there was 3. I bet I would get a -2 if there were 5 negatives. What kind of numbers are these that I'm highlighting in green? They are odd. 1, 3, and 5. The pattern that we just discovered can help us to determine if an answer will be positive or negative when there is only multiplication and division. So this is one of those important things. If the problem only has multiplication and division, then we can count up the negatives to decide if the answer will be positive or negative. Now, we need to keep that in mind because we're going to see some problems in a few minutes that are not just multiplication and division. They're going to have some other stuff going on. So let's start here. How many negative signs are in this problem? 1, and I know that 1 is going to give me a negative answer. So I'm going to go ahead and write a negative here, and then I'm going to do the problem later. This problem, how many negatives are there? 2. This is going to be positive. So I'm just going to put a box around this, and that's going to let me know my answer is going to be positive. What about this problem? How many negatives do you see? I see 2. That's going to give me a positive answer. And here I see 1, 2, 3. That's going to give me a negative answer. I'm going to go ahead and put that negative in there so I don't forget about it. Once I know if the answer will be positive or negative, I can kind of pretend that those signs aren't there. So when I go back to do this problem, I'm going to pretend this negative sign isn't here, and I'm just going to do 5 times 4, which is 20. And the negative sign was already there for me. Now, I'm going to stop right here for a moment and make an example. In soccer, there are a certain set of rules. Can't touch the ball. You have a certain amount of players that are supposed to be on the field. There's only one person allowed to be goalie. In the game of basketball, there's a completely different set of rules. There's a different number of players allowed on the court. You have to use your hands. It would be impossible to play basketball without it. These are 2 different games that have 2 different sets of rules. This set of rules is for multiplying and dividing integers. We had a different set of rules for adding and subtracting integers. Now, when we do a problem like this in class, and I ask, is this answer positive or negative? I don't want you to get confused and say that the answer will be positive because the 5 is bigger and it's positive. Those are our rules for addition and subtraction. These are the rules for multiplying and dividing. So we're going to try and keep that in mind. Let's go back and try some more of these problems. I already know that this answer is positive, so now I'm ignoring these signs. I'm going to pretend like they aren't even there. 3 times 2 is 6, times 3 is 18. On to this problem. I already know that this answer is positive because there were 2 negative signs. 12 times 5 is 60. 60 divided by 10, I can cross that out. Well, that's going to be 6. Why is it positive? Because there were 2 negatives. And remember that double negative, it's like saying don't not wash your hands. That means wash your hands. I'm asking you to do that. And the final question on this page here, I already know that it's negative. 7 times 6 is 42 over 3. 3 goes into 4 once. With 1 left over, 3 goes into 12 4 times. My answer is negative 14. All right, here's some questions that are asking us to evaluate. You guys are going to be experts at evaluating by the end of this year. We remember that evaluate is when they are asking us to substitute or plug in some number in place of a variable. And remember, I always ask you to use bubbles. So instead of writing 6AB, I'm going to write 6 bubble bubble. Now I don't see any operation signs in here. There's no pluses, there's no minuses. That's because in algebra we usually don't show that multiplication sign, but there is actually multiplication happening in between each of these things. Same thing here. There's nothing happening. I don't see it, but I know that AC actually means A times C. And subtract 3 bubble. Over here I'm going to have bubble, bubble, divided by bubble. And here I'm going to have -2 bubble divided by 9. Now I can go back and fill in the values that I need to substitute. Every time I see the letter A, I'm going to be plugging in the number -2. So A is -2. A is -2. Every time I see the letter B, I'm going to be plugging in -9. So here's a -9. This is a -9. And this is a -9. And every time I see the letter C, I'm plugging in the number 18. So that's an 18. That's an 18. And that's an 18. Now we'll go through and solve these using my order of operations. I'm going to jot that down really quickly and use it as a checklist. GEMS, grouping symbols, exponents, multiply and divide from left to right, subtract and add from left to right. Well, let's look at this first problem. 6 times -2 times -9. I see that there are 2 negative numbers here. That lets me know this answer is going to be positive. Now that I know that, I can just multiply. 6 times 2 is 12, times 9 is 108. Order of operations here says that I need to do this multiplication, and then I will subtract. How many negative signs right here? Just 1, so this is going to be a -36. And how many negative signs do you see right here? This negative actually belongs to this 3, so there's 2 negative signs, which means that this is going to be a positive 27. Now, to finish this, you're going to need to use the rules from our other game, our adding and subtracting rules. Do these have same signs or different? Different, so we subtract. 36 take away 27 is 9. And will this answer be positive or negative? What's bigger, 27 or 36? 36 is bigger and it's negative, which will give me a final answer of -9. On these 2 final problems, I'm going to say whether they are positive or negative, but I'd like you to finish them on your own. How many negatives are here? 1, 2. That means that will be positive. How many negatives are here? Just 1. That means that answer will be negative. You can complete those 2 answers in your notes. We also need to discuss integers with powers or exponents. And I want you to look at these 2 problems and notice that there's only one thing that's different. In this problem, there are parentheses. Exponents tell us to take the number that's there and multiply it repeatedly. So this means take the number -2 and multiply it a total of 2 times, which would be this. How many negatives are there? 2. That's going to give me a positive answer. 2 times 2 is 4. The difference here is that without the parentheses, this negative is off by itself. This problem says take the number 2 and multiply it 2 times. 2 times 2. That answer is 4. And then that negative follows down and goes in front of your answer. This answer is -4. On these 2 problems, I'm being asked to use the number -1 and multiply it by itself a number of times. This is -1 to the 5th. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. Well, the answer will either be positive or -1. I'd like you to finish this. Is this positive or -1? Then I'd like you to do the same thing with this. Will this answer be positive or -1? Absolute value. This is a page that we've seen before from some other notes. Remember, it's a distance from 0, and absolute value is positive because it is a distance. Absolute value of 8 is 8. Absolute value of -3 is 3. This would be 17. This would also be 17, and here's where we get that tricky problem. What comes out of here is a positive 17, and then there's a negative on the outside. You're going to see some problems like this. What comes out of this is positive 5. So then my question is, -7 times 5. How many negatives are there? 1. So the answer is negative. 35. What comes out of here? Positive 4. Then you need to complete the problem. 4 times -12. Please finish this in your notes. And finally, what comes out of here is positive. It's a positive 9 times by -3. Please finish those two problems in your notes. This game is similar to Deal or No Deal. It's called Grade or No Grade. And just like Deal or No Deal, you're supposed to choose a suitcase and continue to answer questions. You'll open more suitcases and you're looking to try and find the highest grade instead of the suitcase with the most amount of money. Have fun.